Hey guys, welcome to Mr. Valentin's YouTube video for A Midsummer Night's Dream. Now today we're going to go over the format of your exam, go over some example questions, and that's about it. So let's begin. So the first part of your exam is a matching column. The matching column itself, I find, is pretty straightforward. If you know the characters well, and it is about knowing the characters. If you don't know the characters well, it can pose some challenges. So the first part, it's a matching column, and it's worth approximately 30 points. So this has a heavy weight to it, and you want to make sure, as such, you study. So what you want to do is be able to characterize. If you can remember the story very well, that's always a perk. But if you can't, you need to be able to know the characterization of said characters. So let's do a couple sample questions. So the first quote I'm going to throw at you is, "Let me play Thisbe too. I'll speak in a monstrous voice." So you have to think, what character wanted to play Thisbe? And of course, the character that would want to play Thisbe is Bottom. So you want to make sure that you can characterize these characters and know who said them. Let's try another. The next quote reads, "O spite, O hell, I see you all are bent to set against me for your merriment." So you want to think of which character do we know has felt that all the characters are against him or her. So of course we know the best answer for this would be Helena. So again, this is all about knowing the characters and their characterization. Let's try a couple more. So the next quote reads, "Set your heart at rest. The fairyland buys not the child of me. His mother was a votress of my order." So this one could present some issues, but you should be able to narrow down the characters. So you have some clues. So first off, they're talking about the buying of a child. And we know, of course, that through his mother was a votress of my order. So we know that. So it comes down to two characters. It's either going to be Oberon or Titania. And of course, the best option here is going to be Titania, because she's the one who's always kind of at peace. So set your heart at rest makes more sense. So this quote is best understood by Titania. So these can get a little tricky, but if you have a working knowledge of the text, they shouldn't be too bad. Let's just try one more. The quote reads, "If I cut my finger, I shall make bold with you. Your name, honest gentleman?" So this one could present some definite difficulty. You have to think of when a character could possibly talk about cutting their finger. And this all comes back to when Bottom is first introduced into the fairy world. He meets Titania, and he's talking to Mustard Seed, Cobweb, and those ilk. So of course the best answer here is Bottom. That's one of the more difficult type questions. You'll only see one or two of these. So I would just be aware that a question like that could exist. But for the most part, you'll be seeing questions along the lines of these two and this one. The second section is a little more straightforward and should be pretty obvious to you, and it focuses, of course, on literary terms. So you want to make sure you know your literary terms that are going to be important for our story. of course, illusion. Situational irony. Dramatic irony. Metaphor. Ooh. Simile. Verbal irony, of course. Pun. And then, of course, literary terms specific to Shakespeare. Words like monologue, soliloquy, and aside. The only other one that you might want to be aware of is a double entendre. So those are literary terms you need to know. All right. You're going to get a quote, and you need to identify what the literary term is. Again, if you have any quote that indicates alone on stage, you know that that is immediately a soliloquy. If internal conflict is available as well, I would choose that, but for this test I wouldn't worry about that. Anything to do with Ovid's Metamorphosis is, of course, going to be an illusion. And that's anything like Bottom's head turning into a donkey, the references to Diana or Philomel, anything of that nature will help you to identify that this is indeed an illusion. Remember, a pun, all right, is a play on words. So remember things like the butcher said, "It's nice to meet you." All right, or a better one might be something along the lines of, a termite walks into a bar and says, "Is the bar tender here?" Eh? Yeah. No, they're pretty terrible. So those are the types of things. Think of the whole, again, scene with Bottom, Cobweb, Mustard Seed, and that ilk. Again, they will bring out the most puns. As for the rest of these literary terms, all right, remember situational irony, all right, is when you expect one thing and the opposite occurs. Dramatic irony, all right, when the audience knows more than the character. Metaphor, comparison, that does not use like or as. A simile, comparison using like or as. Verbal irony, when a character says something but means the opposite. Move those down there. All right. A monologue, of course, is a long, uninterrupted speech. And an aside is when a character reveals private information to the audience. Other characters are on stage, for an aside, so keep that in mind. Finally, a double entendre is a figure of speech, alright, in which a spoken phrase can be understood in two ways. Similar to a pun, alright, without the joke portion. So that's that part of the test. The next part of the test is strictly on events that occurred within the story. Things that you should know that maybe you've forgotten or were in the V notes and you didn't have as much time to look over those as much as you should have. So you want to know the allusions to Diana and Phoebe. You want to make sure you know all about Bottom's stupidity, which is pretty easy, something we stressed in class. You want to know that Cupid has gold arrows, and Cupid's kind of blindness you should be aware of. Of course, know about the month of May. May is the month of fertility. So we talked about that. You should know that a league is roughly 3 miles. You may see a math question or two on the exam. And any types of notes that we've talked about, know the scene about how Robin feels towards the lovers. Those are just some things, alright? So this multiple choice part is pretty straightforward because it's all based on things that you need to know that we've talked about in class. So as long as you've been paying attention, you should be fine. Bigger issues would be knowing about Shakespeare, how he defines the comedy, and how he defines the tragedy. But you should be well versed in that at this point. So the next part of your exam is Iambic Pentameter. You know this. This shouldn't pose too much of a difficulty, but I am going to review something that is kind of known of, but we haven't necessarily 100% thoroughly gone over. So I did a very basic one at the top. This is the example I'm always using, alright, because it's perfect Iambic Pentameter. Alright, so you would do me thought I was enamored. Alright, so 3 syllables. Enamored of, stressed in ass. Alright, remember this means unstressed, and that means stressed. Don't forget in your Iambic Pentameter to break up the lines. So you would break them up, alright, after each iamb. Alright, if it's in the middle of a syllable, the syllable is where you break in am, so you want to make sure this is at the am, alright, and then you put your numbers. It's possible you will get a split line, as you see. 2 characters talking. The first one says, "Oh dear, run quickly," and the second one says, "I shall, my dear love." Right? This is very easy. All you have to do is do the same thing you would normally do. Alright, so, "Oh dear," exclamation point, "run quickly." When you go to the next line, you continue as if there was no break at all. So I, which will continue stressed, shall, my dear love. When you go to break it up, you do the same thing. All right, right between quick and Lee. I. And then you put your numbers. So that's this part right here. Could be the most tricky part, but as I just showed you, not very difficult at all. The last part of your tests, you're going to get various quotes, and you're going to explain the importance of it. Just like we did in the one scene where you got a quote and you need to explain why that quote was important or identify something within the quote. That's all you're doing in these. So one is a conversation between two characters and the other one's a monologue. But you're just going to have to wait till you see what those are. And as long as you're familiar with the story, you'll be more than fine. I did just realize that there's one other portion of the test. It's only 10 questions. It's only worth 20 points. But I totally forgot. And this part is, of course, the expected part. You're going to get a variety of scenes. You need to know when they happened within the story. All right, your labeling. So your exposition. Oh, it's blue. How exciting. Complication. Climax. Denouement. And resolution. And of course, you want to make sure you add in your inciting incident. All right. So the best place to go for these, of course, is your V notes, because Act 1's exposition, Act 2 is complication, Act 3 is climax, Act 4 is denouement, and Act 5 is resolution. So on your test, you'll see something along the lines of, let's say, we meet Lysander. That happens. Meet Lysander. That happens, of course, in the exposition. Right. Some of them might be a little more trickier. All right, toss that one aside. We'll say we find out there will be 3 marriages. And of course, we know that happens in the denouement. One more. Let's see. Let's say, what's that? Bottom's head gets turned into an ass. And of course, that happens in the climax. One more. All right. Helena starts fighting with Hermia. That too happens in the climax. So those are the types of questions you'll see on this section of the test. It's, again, pretty straightforward, all right, but you want to definitely take a look at your V notes. And that's your exam, so I wish you the best of luck. I think you'll do just fine, as long as you study. And since you're watching this video, that's a big portion of your studying. Review your V notes, of course, and review the video again to make sure that you have a complete understanding of exactly all the material in the exam. And I will see you on Monday. Have a great weekend, guys.